The fluorescent lights hummed their monotonous song through the canvas-walled field hospital as Captain Sarah Chen moved between beds with the practiced grace of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Her navy blue scrubs were crisp despite the oppressive Afghan heat that lingered even at 2 a.m., and her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun that revealed a face more suited to kindness than the harsh realities of war. "Vitals are stable on bed 7, she murmured to Corporal Martinez, the young medic who shadowed her during night shifts. Her voice carried that particular quality of calm that could steady panicked soldiers and soothe fevered patients with equal effectiveness. "But watch his O2 saturation. If it drops below 92, call me immediately." Martinez nodded, scribbling notes on his clipboard. He'd been at Forward Operating Base Sentinel for only 3 weeks, still jumping at the distant thump of artillery fire that echoed from the mountains. Sarah never flinched. Not once. He found that both comforting and slightly unnerving. The hospital itself was a semi-permanent structure, reinforced canvas stretched over metal frames, with plywood flooring that creaked underfoot and sandbag walls stacked 6 feet high around the perimeter. It wasn't pretty, but it was functional. 30 beds lined the main ward, with a separate surgical suite that had seen more blood than Martinez cared to remember. Tonight was quiet, relatively speaking. Only 14 beds occupied, mostly soldiers recovering from IED injuries, and a handful of local civilians caught in crossfire they never asked for. Sarah paused at bed 12, where a young Afghan girl, no more than 8 years old, slept fitfully, her small body wrapped in bandages. Shrapnel wounds from a Taliban attack on her village. Sarah adjusted the child's IV, her fingers gentle as butterfly wings, then pulled the thin blanket higher around the girl's shoulders. For just a moment, something flickered across Sarah's face, an emotion too complex to name, before the professional mask returned. "Captain Chen, you're something else," came a voice from behind her. She turned to find Major David Torres, the new trauma surgeon who'd arrived at the base just 5 days prior. He was tall, with the kind of Hollywood handsome features that seemed absurd in a war zone, and intelligent eyes that missed very little. He'd been watching her during the shift change, studying the way she moved through the ward. "Just doing my job, Major," Sarah replied with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "No," Torres said, stepping closer but maintaining appropriate professional distance. "I've worked with a lot of combat nurses. You're different. The way you handled that arterial bleed yesterday, no panic, no hesitation. You made decisions like someone with combat experience beyond medical training." Sarah's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. 8 months deployed gives you confidence, sir." 7 months, Torres corrected gently. "I checked your file and that's not what I meant." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You move like infantry, the way you scan rooms when you enter, how you position yourself with your back to walls. Where were you before nursing?" The question hung in the air between them like smoke. Sarah's jaw tensed for just a fraction of a second before she deflected with practiced ease. "College, mostly. Boring story, really. Now if you'll excuse me, Major, I need to check on the post-ops." She moved past him with fluid efficiency, leaving Torres standing there with more questions than answers. He watched her go, nodding the way she unconsciously cleared corners, how her eyes tracked the entrance even while attending to patients, the subtle situational awareness that spoke of training most nurses never received. What Torres couldn't see was the weight Sarah carried, invisible but crushing. What he couldn't know was that earlier in her shift, she'd automatically calculated firing angles from each bed position, identified hard cover versus concealment, and mapped the fastest routes to the weapon lockers, all while changing dressings and administering medications. Old habits died hard. Or rather, they didn't die at all. They just waited in the shadows of her mind, coiled like springs. As the night crept toward 3 a.m., Sarah found herself alone in the supply room, ostensibly checking inventory. Her hands moved mechanically, counting bandages and cataloging medications, while her mind drifted to places she tried to wall off. The locked footlocker in her quarters called to her like a siren song. Inside lay the remnants of Captain Sarah Chen, USMC Scout Sniper, a woman who had once been the most feared shooter in her battalion, a woman who could put a round through a target's eye at 800 meters in desert wind, a woman who had taken 27 confirmed lives in service of her country. That woman was supposed to be dead, reborn as this gentler version who healed instead of destroyed. But tonight something felt wrong. Sarah's instincts, those finely honed combat senses that had kept her alive through 3 tours, were screaming warnings her conscious mind kept trying to dismiss. The base felt different. The air tasted of anticipation and cordite. In the mountains beyond the wire, she sensed movement, purpose, malevolent intent gathering like a storm. She closed her eyes and forced herself to breathe. "You're a nurse now," she whispered to herself, "just a nurse." But even as she said it, her hands betrayed her, automatically performing the muscle memory check of a rifle magazine that wasn't there. Palm strike to the base, tug to verify seating, tap to ensure rounds were loose. She caught herself and laughed bitterly at the absurdity. In the distance, beyond the hospital walls and defensive perimeter, beyond the concertina wire and watchtowers, darkness moved with purpose through the Afghan night. Men with weapons and hatred in their hearts, drawing closer with each passing hour, their target already chosen. And in the supply room of Forward Operating Base Sentinel's Field Hospital, Captain Sarah Chen counted bandages and pretended she was only a nurse, while every instinct in her warrior's soul screamed that the war she'd tried to leave behind was about to find her again. The storm was coming. She just didn't know it would arrive in less than 72 hours. The explosion shattered the pre-dawn silence at 5:47 hours. Sarah was 3 hours into her shift when the radio crackled with urgent voices. IED strike en route Copper, multiple casualties inbound. ETA 15 minutes. The hospital erupted into controlled chaos. Sarah's hands moved with mechanical precision, clearing beds, prepping surgical bays, laying out trauma supplies in perfect order. Around her, staff rushed and shouted, but she remained an island of eerie calm in the storm. It was a skill she'd learned in another life, the ability to slow time through sheer force of will, to think clearly when everyone else drowned in adrenaline. "Chen, I need you in surgery." Major Torres barked as the first Blackhawk thundered overhead, rotors beating the air like war drums. The doors burst open. Stretchers flooded in, carrying broken men who screamed or didn't scream at all. The silent ones were always worse. Blood painted the floor in abstract patterns that Sarah's mind automatically analyzed for arterial spray versus venous bleeding. 5 critical, 3 urgent, 2 expectant. Her assessment took seconds. "Bed 3, tension pneumothorax," she called out, already moving. Her hands found the young sergeant's chest, palpating for landmarks. She grabbed the 14-gauge needle without looking, knowing exactly where it would be. "On my mark. Now." The needle punched through intercostal muscle with a hiss of released pressure. The sergeant gasped, color returning to his lips. Torres watched from across the room, his skilled surgeon's hands buried in another soldier's abdomen. Chen moved like a dancer through carnage, anticipating needs before they arose, directing younger medics with quiet authority, her scrubs progressively soaking with other people's blood. She worked for 6 hours straight, then 8, then 12. The adrenaline finally faded around 1800 hours. 18 hours since she'd started her shift. 14 wounded treated. 13 would live. One 19-year-old private from Alabama wouldn't see his daughter born. Sarah stripped off her blood-crusted gloves in the scrub room, her hands shaking for the first time all day. Not from stress or exhaustion, but from the memories flooding back. Other wounded men, other impossible choices, other faces she couldn't save. She gripped the sink until her knuckles turned white, forcing her breathing to steady. "You saved them." Torres appeared in the doorway, equally blood-stained and exhausted. "Without you, we'd have lost 5 more, maybe 6. "Just doing my job," Sarah replied automatically, the mantra that kept her grounded. "That's what you always say." He moved closer, concern evident in his eyes. "But Sarah, you worked 18 hours without break, without coffee, barely any water. Where did you learn that kind of endurance?" She met his gaze, and for a heartbeat, he saw something ancient and dangerous flicker behind her exhaustion. Then it was gone, replaced by the gentle nurse he thought he knew. "Medical school teaches you a lot about functioning on no sleep, Major." But Torres wasn't convinced. He'd seen combat surgeons crack under less pressure. Chen didn't just endure, she thrived in chaos, moved through it like she'd been born in fire. It didn't add up. Sarah escaped to her quarters as soon as her relief arrived. The small plywood room was Spartan. A cot, a footlocker, a single photograph of her family taped to the wall. She locked the door and sat on the cot, staring at the footlocker for a long moment before her trembling fingers found the combination lock. Click, click, click. The lid opened, releasing ghosts. On top lay her ghillie suit, the shaggy camouflage that had made her invisible in a dozen different terrains. Beneath it, range cards meticulously drawn in her own hand, distances, wind patterns, elevation compensations for valleys she'd never see again. A scout sniper badge, earned through hell. And finally, the photograph. 4 Marines in desert MARPAT, arms around each other, genuine smiles beneath the weight of war. Sarah recognized the woman she used to be, harder, leaner, with eyes that had seen too much death. Beside her, Corporal James "Jimmy" Martinez, her spotter and best friend. Behind them, Sergeant Collins and Lance Corporal Davis. All 3 men were dead now. Jimmy had died in her arms during an ambush in Helmand Province, his blood soaking into the sand while she screamed for a medic who couldn't reach them in time. She'd killed the 6 insurgents who'd set the trap, but it didn't matter. Jimmy was gone. Collins and Davis followed 6 months later, different operations, same ending. Sarah had been the best sniper in her battalion, 27 confirmed kills, legendary shots that other shooters still talked about in hushed tones. She could read wind like a book, calculate holds in her sleep, and remain motionless for 16 hours waiting for a single perfect shot. The Marine Corps had wanted her to train new snipers, but after Jimmy died, she couldn't pull another trigger. Couldn't watch another friend die. So she'd left, used her GI Bill for nursing school, convinced herself that healing could replace destroying, that saving lives could balance the ones she'd taken. Some days she almost believed it. But tonight, looking at Jimmy's frozen smile, she felt the old wolf stirring inside her chest. Outside her window, darkness settled over Fob Sentinel. In the mountains beyond the wire, insurgent scouts watched through binoculars, counting defenders, mapping weaknesses, planning an attack that would come like thunder from clear skies. And in her small room, Sarah Chen closed the footlocker and lay back on her cot, trying to ignore the weight of intuition that screamed danger in a language her nursing degree couldn't translate. The warrior inside her knew. The storm was already here. The morning briefing crackled with tension that Sarah could taste like copper on her tongue. She'd been called in along with department heads, unusual for medical staff unless something serious was developing. Colonel Richard stood at the front of the operations center, his weathered face grave as he gestured to a map dotted with red hostile markers that seemed to be multiplying like a rash. "Intelligence indicates a significant insurgent force has been assembling in the coast mountains over the past 72 hours, Richard said, his voice carrying the weight of command. "Local sources suggest they're planning a coordinated assault on this FOB. Timeline: within the next 48 to 96 hours. Sarah's eyes traced the map with professional interest that went beyond medical preparation. She noted the terrain features, the likely approach routes, the vulnerable sectors. Her gaze lingered on the eastern perimeter, the hospital's side. Exposed, inadequate fields of fire, That dried riverbed offered concealed approach to within 100 meters of their position. The hospital will maintain full operational status, Richards continued, but we're implementing enhanced security protocols. Staff Sergeant Ramirez will coordinate additional defensive positions around medical facilities. After the briefing, Sarah found herself walking the perimeter during her break, ostensibly getting fresh air but unable to stop her tactical assessment. The base defenses were solid on 3 sides, proper interlocking fields of fire, good sight lines, adequate lighting. But the eastern approach, where the hospital sat, relied too heavily on a single observation post and had a significant dead zone where the generator building blocked coverage. She spotted Staff Sergeant Ramirez inspecting fighting positions and approached him carefully. "Sergeant, can I ask you something?" Ramirez turned, offering a respectful nod. "Sure thing, ma'am. What's on your mind?" "The eastern perimeter, near the hospital." Sarah gestured toward the area. "That dried riverbed provides concealed approach to about 100 meters out, and the generator building creates a blind spot for the op. Have you considered repositioning the observation post or adding a secondary position?" Ramirez followed her gaze, then smiled indulgently. "With respect, Captain, we've got this covered. Been doing base security for 12 years. That riverbed is monitored and we've got overlapping sectors of fire." His tone was polite but dismissive. "You focus on keeping our boys breathing and we'll focus on keeping the bad guys out. Deal?" Sarah forced a smile. "Of course, just a thought." As she walked away, frustration simmered beneath her professional exterior. She'd cleared buildings in Fallujah, defended outposts in Helmand, knew insurgent tactics better than most infantry officers. But to Ramirez, to everyone here, she was just a nurse, which was exactly what she'd wanted when she'd buried her past. Except now that past might be the difference between life and death. "Chen." She turned to find Private Jackson hobbling toward her on crutches, his leg still healing from the IED strike. The young Marine's face lit up when he saw her. "Hey, Captain, Doc Torres says I might be able to ditch these crutches by next week." "That's great news, Jackson." Sarah's smile became genuine. The kid was only 19, baby-faced and enthusiastic despite everything he'd seen. "Just don't rush it. Healing takes time." "Can I ask you something?" Jackson lowered his voice conspiratorially as they walked. "You ever get scared, like with all this talk about an attack coming?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Fear is natural, it keeps you sharp. The trick is not letting it control you." She paused, choosing her words. "When things get dangerous, focus on what you can control, your breathing, your actions, taking care of the person next to you." "Is that what they taught you in nursing school?" "Something like that," Sarah replied, though the lessons had come from a different kind of school, one that taught killing before healing. That evening, the hospital received 3 more civilian casualties from a Taliban attack on a nearby village. A farmer with severe burns, his wife with gunshot wounds, and their 10-year-old son with shrapnel injuries. Sarah worked alongside Major Torres, their movements synchronized after weeks of shared surgeries. "The boy reminds me of someone," Torres said quietly as they stabilized the child. "My nephew. Same age, same stubborn determination to be brave when he's terrified." Sarah nodded, understanding. The little girl from bed 12, now recovering well, had reminded her of someone too. Her own niece back in California, safe and innocent, untouched by the kind of violence that shattered childhood in places like this. "This is why we're here," she said softly. "People like them." Torres glanced at her, seeing something vulnerable beneath her usual armor. "Is that why you became a nurse? After whatever you did before?" Sarah's hands paused for just a fraction of a second over the boy's IV line. "What makes you think I did something before?" "Because nobody moves like you do, thinks like you do, stays that calm under pressure without serious training." Torres' voice was gentle, not accusatory. And because sometimes when you think no one's watching, you look like you're carrying ghosts. She met his eyes across the surgical table. For a moment, she considered telling him, considered unburdening herself of the weight she'd carried alone for 3 years. But the moment passed. We all carry ghosts in places like this, Major. It comes with the job. Before Torres could respond, the base's alert system blared to life. Not the full attack alarm, but the warning tone that meant increased threat level. Through the hospital's entrance, Sarah could see soldiers running to defensive positions, weapons being distributed, floodlights snapping on around the perimeter. Colonel Richards' voice crackled over the PA system. All personnel, we have confirmed movement in the mountains. Attack timeline has been moved up. Estimated hostile contact within 24 to 36 hours. All units to defensive posture Alpha. I repeat, defensive posture Alpha. Sarah felt ice water flood her veins, but her hands remained steady as she finished with the Afghan boy. Around her, the hospital staff exchanged nervous glances, their anxiety palpable. Only Torres noticed that Chen's expression hadn't changed at all. She'd been expecting this. Private Jackson appeared in the doorway, no longer on crutches, having been pressed into light duty. His eyes were wide. Captain Chen, they're saying this could be big, like really big. Sarah placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Then we do our jobs, Jackson. We take care of the wounded no matter what. She paused, her grip tightening slightly. And when things get bad, and they might, you remember what I told you. Control your breathing. Control your actions. Take care of the person next to you. Yes, ma'am. As Jackson left, Sarah stood in the center of the hospital, surrounded by beds and medical equipment, and felt the weight of two identities crushing her from opposite directions. The nurse who healed, the sniper who killed, both were real, both were her. And in less than 24 hours, she had the terrible feeling she'd need to be both. Outside, darkness fell over Fob Sentinel like a shroud. In the mountains, insurgents checked their weapons and studied maps of the base, their fingers tracing the path to the hospital. The calm before the storm was ending. Thunder was coming. The attack came at 2:03 hours, when human alertness hits its lowest point and dreams blur with reality. Sarah was checking vitals on bed 7 when the first mortar round screamed overhead, a sound she recognized instantly, that distinctive whistle of incoming death that most people never hear twice. Her body reacted before her mind could catch up, muscle memory from 3 combat tour overriding 3 years of nursing. Incoming, she shouted, diving toward Private Jackson and pulling him to the floor as the round impacted 200 meters away. The explosion shook dust from the ceiling supports. Emergency lights flickered. Then came the second round, closer, then the third. The base erupted into chaos. Sirens wailed. Return fire crackled from defensive positions. The distinct chatter of M240 machine guns mixed with the deeper thump of MK19 grenade launchers. Sarah's radio exploded with frantic voices. Contact east perimeter. Multiple hostiles in the wire. RPG. RPG. Major Torres stumbled from the surgical suite, his eyes wide. What's happening? We're under attack. Sarah's voice was unnaturally calm as another mortar round impacted closer, rattling medical equipment. Get everyone away from the exterior walls. Move critical patients to the center of the ward. Now. The major opened his mouth to question her authority, then saw something in her eyes that made him simply obey. Around them, nurses and medics scrambled to move patients, their training battling against primal fear. Sarah moved to the entrance, peering through the reinforced canvas flap. The base's main defensive line was holding. She could see tracers cutting through the darkness, muzzle flashes from fighting positions, flares turning night into flickering day. The insurgents had hit the western and northern perimeters hard, exactly as she'd have done it. Fix the enemy's attention. Make them commit reserves. Then hit the real target from an unexpected direction. Her eyes snapped to the eastern perimeter, toward the dried riverbed she'd warned about. Nothing visible yet, but every instinct screamed danger. That's where she'd come from. That's where. Contact east side. Contact east side. The radio confirmed her worst fears. Multiple hostiles breaching the wire near the hospital. Sarah's world crystallized into perfect clarity, time slowing as adrenaline sharpened every sense. She could hear boots on gravel, moving fast, combat-experienced fighters who knew exactly where they were going. The hospital's four-man security detail rushed from their positions toward the breach, weapons raised. Through the darkness, muzzle flashes erupted. The distinctive crack of AK-47s. Two of the security team went down immediately, their bodies jerking like puppets with cut strings. Staff Sergeant Ramirez returned fire, his M4 barking, but Sarah saw him stumble backward, blood spraying from his shoulder. "Jesus Christ," Torres whispered beside her, "they're coming right for us." Sarah's mind split into two tracks, the nurse calculating triage for incoming wounded and the warrior counting enemy fighters, assessing their weapons and tactics. 12 hostiles, maybe 13. AK-47s, at least one PKM machine gun RPGs. They moved with military precision, bounding by teams covering each other's movement, not random insurgents, trained fighters. The remaining security personnel fell back toward the hospital, laying down covering fire. Ramirez dragged himself behind a concrete barrier, his M4 still spitting rounds despite his wound. But Sarah could see the tactical reality with brutal clarity. 4 defenders, 2 wounded, against a dozen attackers who had momentum and surprise. They had maybe 90 seconds before the insurgents reached the hospital. "Torres, get everyone to the surgical suite. Barricade the door with whatever you can find." Sarah's voice carried absolute authority now, the officer she used to be bleeding through the nurse she'd become. "What are you going to do?" Sarah didn't answer. She was already moving, sprinting toward where Sergeant Miller lay motionless near the entrance, his M4 rifle still clutched in dead hands. She hit the ground in a controlled slide, ignoring the gravel tearing through her scrubs, and grabbed the weapon. Her hands moved with automatic precision. Press check to confirm a round chambered magazine check, selector switch from safe to semi. The rifle felt like coming home. "Chen, what the hell?" Torres started. "Gio," she screamed, "get them to safety now." 2 insurgents appeared at the hospital's entrance, silhouettes against the burning flares outside. They moved fast, weapons raised, already firing. But Sarah was faster. 3 controlled shots, center mass, failure drill to the head. Both fighters dropped. The transformation was complete. Captain Sarah Chen, gentle night nurse, ceased to exist. In her place stood someone else entirely, a Marine scout sniper who had once been the most dangerous woman in Helmand Province. She moved to the entrance, using the canvas wall as concealment, and acquired the next target. An insurgent was advancing on Ramirez's position, flanking the wounded sergeant. Sarah's shot took him in the side of the neck. He went down clutching his throat. "Holy shit," Ramirez gasped, staring at her from behind his barrier. "Chen, are you?" "Stay down, Sergeant," Sarah commanded, already tracking the next threat. The insurgents had realized they were facing more than terrified medical staff. Their assault faltered as they sought cover. Sarah used the moment to sprint to Ramirez's position, grabbing the wounded man and dragging him toward the hospital entrance with strength born of desperation. "You're a goddamn shooter," Ramirez wheezed through his pain. "How?" "Later," Sarah cut him off, propping him against sandbags inside the entrance. She took his spare magazines, the weight familiar in her hands. "Can you still fight?" He nodded, raising his M4 with his good arm. "Always." An AK-47 opened up from 50 meters, stitching rounds across the hospital's exterior. Sarah dropped flat, counting muzzle flashes. 4 shooters visible, probably more in reserve. They were regrouping, preparing for a coordinated assault. Inside, she could hear Tors shouting orders, patients crying out in fear, equipment crashing as they built makeshift barricades. Private Jackson appeared beside her, holding a rifle he barely knew how to use, his face pale but determined. "Captain, I can help." "Jackson, get back to—" Sarah's words died as she saw more insurgents emerging from the darkness. 6 more. No, 7. They'd committed their entire assault force. 20 fighters total, and she dropped 3. The math was brutal and simple. 17 attackers with military training against her, a wounded sergeant, a terrified private, and a hospital full of people who couldn't fight. Sarah grabbed a fallen insurgent's AK-47, checking the magazine. Full. She slung it across her back along with the M4. 2 rifles, maybe 60 rounds total, against 17 men who wanted everyone in this hospital dead. "Listen to me," she told Jackson and Ramirez, her voice steady despite the impossibility of their situation. "They're going to rush us. When they do, aim center mass. Short controlled bursts. Don't try to be a hero. Just keep them outside these walls." "What about you?" Jackson asked. Sarah checked her weapons one more time, then looked at the young Marine with eyes that had seen this nightmare before. "I'm going to do what I was trained to do." Outside, the insurgent commander shouted orders in Pashto. Sarah understood enough to know they were preparing the final assault. They'd hit the hospital from 3 sides simultaneously, overwhelming any defense. She thought of the patients behind her, the little Afghan girl, the wounded soldiers, Major Tors trying to protect them all. She thought of Jimmy Martinez dying in her arms, of Collins and Davis, of all the brothers and sisters she'd lost. She'd become a nurse to save lives instead of taking them. But tonight, saving lives meant becoming who she used to be. "Here they come," Ramirez said quietly. Sarah settled into firing position, her breathing steady, her hands rock solid. The wolf inside her was fully awake now, hungry and familiar. "Let them come," she said. And the hospital doors exploded inward as hell arrived with muzzle flashes and screaming. The first insurgent through the door never saw Sarah. He was focused on the beds, the vulnerable patients, already raising his AK-47 when her double tap caught him in the chest. He crumpled forward, momentum carrying him into a medical cart that crashed over with a metallic clang. The second fighter was smarter, using his dead comrade as cover while he swept the room. But Sarah had already moved, flowing behind a support beam with the fluid grace of a predator. She angled out and put 3 rounds into his side before he could acquire her position. 2 down. "Contact left," Ramirez shouted, his M4 barking from the entrance. An insurgent trying to flank through the supply corridor jerked backward, hit in the shoulder but kept moving. Sarah's follow-up shot dropped him permanently. The hospital had become a maze of death. Insurgents poured through breaches in the canvas walls, and Sarah moved through the chaos like smoke, appearing, killing, vanishing. She dropped her nurse's facade entirely now. This was pure combat, the deadly art she'd perfected through 3 tours and countless firefights. An insurgent rounded a corner and came face to face with her at point-blank range. He was young, maybe 20, with fear and fury in his eyes. Sarah didn't hesitate. Her rifle was faster. He went down clutching his throat, choking on blood. "Jesus Christ, Chen!" Tors appeared from the surgical suite, his face pale with shock. He'd been watching through a crack in the barricade, seeing the gentle nurse he thought he knew transformed into something from a nightmare or a battlefield legend. "Stay back," Sarah commanded, ejecting an empty magazine and slamming a fresh one home. The motion was so automatic, so perfectly executed that Tors finally understood this wasn't training. This was identity. Private Jackson was pinned down behind an overturned bed, an insurgent advancing on his position. The boy fired wildly, missing, his hands shaking too badly for accuracy. Sarah's shot took the attacker in the head from 30 feet away. Jackson stared at her with wide eyes that mixed terror with awe. "Breathe, Marine," she told him, her voice somehow calm despite the gunfire. "Control what you can control." The insurgents adapted quickly. They'd realized the hospital had a serious defender and changed tactics, moving more cautiously, using suppressive fire. Sarah counted rounds in her head, 23 left in the M4, maybe 30 in the AK she'd acquired. Not enough. Not nearly enough. She grabbed the AK from the first insurgent she dropped and checked the magazine. Full. Bless the enemy's preparation. She now had 2 rifles, switching between them as situations demanded, using American accuracy for precision shots and Soviet reliability for close quarters. An RPG streaked through the entrance, impacting against sandbags and detonating with a concussive blast that knocked equipment off shelves. The explosion left Sarah's ears ringing, but she was already moving, already shooting. 2 more insurgents down. "They're trying to flank through the east corridor," Ramirez called out, his face pale from blood loss but his shooting hand steady. The sergeant had propped himself against sandbags, creating a defensive position that controlled the main entrance. Bodies were starting to pile up in his field of fire. Sarah sprinted across open ground to reinforce him, bullets tracking her movement, stitching holes through canvas walls inches from her head. She dove into cover beside Ramirez and immediately engaged 3 fighters trying to rush the corridor. Her shooting was mechanical perfection. Double tap. Acquire new target, double tap, shift position. 3 bodies hit the ground in as many seconds. "Who the hell are you?" Ramirez gasped, staring at her with new understanding. "Marine Scout Sniper," Sarah said, her eyes never leaving the battlefield. 3 tour, 27 confirmed kills. She paused, drilling an insurgent who'd exposed himself for half a second. "Make that 31. "Why didn't anyone?" "Because I wanted to save people, not kill them," Sarah interrupted, her voice carrying 3 years of buried pain. "Didn't work out that way tonight." An insurgent appeared suddenly at close range, too close for rifles. He lunged with a knife, young and fast and desperate. Sarah dropped her rifle and engaged hand-to-hand, muscle memory from combatives training taking over. She redirected his knife thrust, broke his elbow with a vicious strike, and drove her own combat knife taken from a fallen Marine into his kidney. He collapsed, gasping. "Behind you," Jackson screamed. Sarah spun, snatching up her rifle and caught an insurgent climbing through a torn section of wall. Her shot hit him mid-climb. He hung there for a moment, then slid down, leaving a red smear on the canvas. The firefight had been raging for maybe 4 minutes, an eternity in combat time. Sarah's scrubs were soaked with sweat and blood, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Around her, the hospital was destroyed, equipment shattered, walls torn, beds overturned. But the patients in the surgical suite were still alive, protected by Tor's barricade and Sarah's lethal efficiency. She counted bodies, 8 insurgents down, maybe 9. That left 8 or 9 still in the fight, and her ammunition situation was getting critical. "Tors," she shouted toward the surgical suite. "Casualties." "Everyone's alive in here," the major called back. "Chen, where did you?" His question was cut off by a massive explosion that rocked the entire hospital. The generator building, Sarah realized with horror. They'd blown the generators. The lights died, plunging everything into darkness broken only by muzzle flashes and distant flares. Night vision. The insurgents had night vision. Sarah's tactical mind raced through options. In the darkness, she was at a severe disadvantage. The enemy could see her. She was operating on sound and muzzle flash alone. She needed to level the playing field or they'd overwhelm her position in minutes. Then she saw it, a flare gun in the emergency equipment locker, barely visible in the dying light. She low-crawled to it, grabbed it, and fired straight up through a hole in the roof. The flare burst overhead, bathing everything in harsh red light that threw crazy shadows and eliminated night vision advantage. "Ramirez, Jackson, suppressive fire on my mark," Sarah commanded, her voice carrying the authority of her old rank. Both men responded instantly, their rifles opening up on likely enemy positions. Sarah used the covering fire to sprint to a new position, flanking the main insurgent force. She'd spotted their commander now, a tall figure directing his fighters with hand signals, positioned behind a concrete barrier about 40 meters out. He was coordinating the assault, calling the shots, keeping his men organized. Take out the head and the body dies. But 40 meters in flickering flare light, with adrenaline spiking and multiple threats to track, was a difficult shot even for her. She settled into position behind a fallen section of wall, controlled her breathing, found her natural respiratory pause and squeezed. The commander jerked backward, hit high in the shoulder. Not a kill shot, he'd moved at the last instant. But he was down, screaming orders, his assault force momentarily confused. Sarah used their confusion ruthlessly. She engaged targets of opportunity, an insurgent exposed while repositioning, another silhouetted against flames from the burning generator building. 2 more down. Her round count was critical now, maybe 10 rounds left across both rifles. "They're pulling back," Jackson shouted, his voice cracking with the strain. He was right. The insurgents were retreating, dragging their wounded commander with them, falling back into the darkness beyond the hospital perimeter. Sarah tracked them through her sights but held her fire. Every round mattered now. Then she heard it, the beautiful sound of American firepower. The quick reaction force had finally broken through, their M4s and machine guns tearing into the retreating insurgents from their flank. The cavalry had arrived. Sarah slumped against the wall, her rifle finally lowering, her body beginning to shake as the adrenaline started to fade. Around her, the hospital was a war zone, bodies sprawled in grotesque positions, blood pooling on the floor, equipment destroyed, walls shredded. But through the chaos, she could hear voices from the surgical suite. Alive, still alive. "Clear, clear, hospital secure." Voices shouted as Marines swept through, clearing rooms with professional efficiency. Major Torres emerged from the barricade, stepping over bodies, his eyes finding Sarah in the wreckage. He stopped 3 feet away, seeing her fully for the first time. This woman who'd saved them all, covered in blood and cordite, holding weapons like extensions of her own body. "Captain Chen," he said quietly, "or should I say—" "Just Sarah," she interrupted, her voice hoarse. "Just Sarah." Private Jackson limped over, his face streaked with tears and smoke. "Captain, you saved us, all of us." Sarah looked at the young Marine, at Torres, at Ramirez being tended by medics, at the bodies of insurgents she'd killed to protect the innocent. The wolf inside her was quiet now, sated, retreating back into the shadows. But she knew the truth. The wolf never really left. It just waited, patient and eternal, for the moment it would be needed again. And tonight it had been very, very needed. The quiet after battle was always worse than the fighting itself. Sarah sat on an overturned medical cart, mechanically field-stripping the M4 rifle with hands that finally trembled. Around her, Marines secured the perimeter while medics triaged the wounded, both friendly and enemy. The hospital looked like a hurricane had torn through it. Canvas walls hung in tatters, medical equipment lay shattered across blood-slicked floors, and the acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with the copper tang of spilled blood. 11 insurgent bodies had been counted inside the hospital. Sarah had killed 9 of them herself. "Captain Chen." She looked up to find Colonel Richards standing before her, his weathered face unreadable in the harsh emergency lighting. Behind him stood 2 MPs and Sarah's stomach clenched. This was it. The reckoning. You couldn't kill 9 men, even enemy combatants, without questions being asked. "Sir," she said quietly, setting down the rifle. Richard studied her for a long moment, his eyes taking in her blood-soaked scrubs, the tactical precision of her weapon's placement, the way she still maintained situational awareness even in exhaustion. Staff Sergeant Ramirez told me something interesting while the medics were patching him up. Said you shoot like a Marine Scout sniper. Sarah said nothing, just met his gaze steadily. So I pulled your full service record, the one you asked personnel to bury when you transferred to medical. Richard's voice was neutral, but his eyes held something else, understanding, maybe respect. Captain Sarah Chen, USMC Scout Sniper School honor graduate, 3 combat tour, 27 confirmed kills, Silver Star for Valor, Purple Heart. He paused. Why didn't you tell anyone? Because I didn't want to be that person anymore, sir. Sarah's voice cracked slightly. I wanted to heal people, not kill them. I thought I could leave it behind. You saved 32 lives tonight, Captain. Patients, staff, wounded soldiers. If you hadn't been here, hadn't been who you were, Richards shook his head, the insurgents would have massacred everyone in this hospital. I still killed 9 people. The words tasted like ash in Sarah's mouth. 9 enemy combatants who were trying to murder civilians and wounded soldiers under our protection, Richards corrected firmly. That's not murder, Captain. That's war. And you're damn good at it. Before Sarah could respond, Major Torres pushed through the chaos, his surgical gown still stained with blood from emergency procedures. Colonel, I need Chen back. We've got wounded coming in from the main assault, friendly and enemy. She's my best trauma nurse. Richards glanced between them, then nodded. She's all yours, Major. But Chen, we're going to talk more about this. Your skills are too valuable to waste. As the colonel walked away, Torres knelt beside Sarah, his eyes searching her face. Are you okay? And I don't mean physically. Sarah laughed bitterly. I don't know what I am right now. You're someone who just fought off an entire assault force to protect the helpless, Torres said quietly. You're a hero, Sarah. Heroes don't have 9 bodies on their conscience in a single night. Heroes do whatever it takes to protect the innocent. Torres stood, offering his hand. And right now, the innocent need us to be nurses again. Think you can handle that? Sarah took his hand and stood, feeling the weight of her 2 identities crushing her from opposite directions. The warrior who killed, the healer who saved, both real, both necessary, both her. Yeah, she said softly, I can handle that. They worked through the rest of the night, treating 18 wounded soldiers from the main assault. Sarah's hands moved with practiced precision, starting IVs, assessing injuries, coordinating care. But she caught herself checking corners, tracking movement, calculating firing angles. Old habits that wouldn't die. Around 400 hours, during a brief lull, she found herself alone in the destroyed supply room. Her reflection stared back from a cracked mirror, face smudged with smoke and blood, eyes haunted by what she'd done, hands that had killed and healed in the same night. Who are you? She whispered to her reflection. You're both. Sarah spun to find Staff Sergeant Ramirez standing in the doorway, his shoulder bandaged, his arm in a sling. He moved into the room with the careful precision of the wounded. Sergeant, you should be resting. Couldn't sleep, Ramirez interrupted. Kept thinking about what I saw tonight. The way you moved, the way you shot. That wasn't luck, Captain, that was art. Deadly art, but art nonetheless. Sarah turned away, unable to meet his eyes. I'm not proud of. You should be. Ramirez's voice was firm. I've been doing base security for 12 years, seen hundreds of firefights. What you did tonight, you saved us all. Every single person in this hospital is breathing because you were willing to be what we needed you to be. A killer. A protector. Ramirez stepped closer. There's a difference, ma'am. A big one. Killers enjoy the death. Protectors do what's necessary to save lives even when it costs them pieces of their soul. He paused. I saw your face while you were shooting. You weren't enjoying it. You were hurting with every trigger pull. Sarah's eyes burned with unshed tears. Then why did I do it? Because you're a better person than I am, Ramirez said simply. You feel the cost of every life taken. Most of us. We go numb after a while, but you carry each one. That's what makes you different. That's what makes you dangerous and compassionate at the same time." Before Sarah could respond, Private Jackson appeared, interrupting the moment. His face was pale, his hands shaking. "Captain Chen, I need to tell you something." "What is it, Jackson?" When that insurgent was coming at me, when I froze up, tears streamed down the young Marine's face. "You saved my life, and I just wanted to say thank you, and I'm sorry I wasn't better, stronger." Sarah's heart broke for him. She recognized that look, the shame of freezing in combat, the guilt of being saved instead of saving others. She'd worn that expression herself once, a lifetime ago. "Jackson, listen to me." She gripped his shoulders firmly. "You stood your ground when most people would have run. You stayed in the fight even though you were terrified. That's not weakness, that's courage. Real courage isn't not being afraid. It's being afraid and doing it anyway." "But you weren't afraid. You were so calm, so." "I was terrified," Sarah admitted, surprising herself with the honesty. "Every second of that firefight I was scared. Scared for you, for Tors, for the patients, for everyone. Fear doesn't go away with experience, Jackson. You just learn to function through it." The young Marine nodded slowly, processing her words. Will you teach me how to be like you?" Sarah glanced at Ramirez, who raised an eyebrow. The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. If she said yes, she was accepting both halves of herself, warrior and healer. If she said no, she was denying a part of who she was. "I'll teach you to survive," she said finally. "To protect others, to be strong enough to do what's necessary. But Jackson, never become comfortable with killing. The day it stops bothering you is the day you lose your humanity." A commotion outside interrupted them. Sarah moved to the entrance and saw Marines surrounding a captured insurgent being brought in on a stretcher. He was wounded but alive, bleeding from a gunshot to the shoulder, the commander she'd shot during the assault. "We need a nurse," one of the Marines called out. Sarah's jaw clenched. Every instinct screamed at her to let him bleed out, to turn away from the man who tried to murder everyone she'd protected. But Tors was already moving toward the wounded enemy, and Sarah found herself following. "Chen, I need your help," Tors said, not as a request but as a statement of fact. Sarah looked down at the insurgent commander. He was maybe 35, with a thick beard and eyes full of hatred and pain. This man had led the assault, had coordinated the attack that nearly killed them all, had wanted her patients dead. And now he was her patient. "Get him on the table," Sarah said quietly, her voice steady despite the war raging inside her soul. "Let's save his life." The insurgent spat at her, cursing in Pashto. Sarah understood enough to know he was calling her a whore, a murderer promising death to all Americans. She simply started an IV with hands that didn't shake. "Why help him?" Jackson asked, confusion written across his young face. "After what he tried to do." Sarah met the insurgent's hate-filled eyes as she worked. "Because we're not like them. We don't choose who deserves healing based on their beliefs or their crimes. We save lives, all lives. That's what separates us from the monsters." Tors nodded approvingly, working alongside her. Together, they stabilized the enemy commander, patched his wounds, ensured he'd live to face justice or prisoner exchange or whatever future awaited him. When they finished, Sarah stepped outside into the pre-dawn darkness, her body and soul exhausted beyond measure. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten, painting the destroyed hospital in shades of gray and gold. She'd killed 9 men tonight. She'd saved 32 lives. Both truths existed simultaneously, neither canceling out the other, both parts of who she was and what she'd chosen to become. Sarah Chen, Marine Scout sniper and trauma nurse, warrior and healer, killer and savior. She was learning, finally, that she could be both. Sedon was still an hour away when the radio crackled with the news that made Sarah's blood run cold. "All units be advised. We have confirmed movement of a secondary insurgent force regrouping in the hills." Estimate 20 to 30 hostiles, possibly preparing for another assault. They're setting up a command position approximately 400 meters northeast of the hospital. Sarah was suturing a Marine's leg wound when the transmission came through. Her hands paused for just a fraction of a second before continuing their work. But her mind was already calculating. 400 meters, northeast, elevated position. The insurgents were learning, adapting. They'd hit the hospital again, but this time with better coordination, better tactics. Unless someone stopped them first. Colonel Richards appeared in the hospital entrance 20 minutes later, his face grim. "Chen, I need to talk to you. Now." Sarah finished bandaging her patient and followed the colonel outside, where Staff Sergeant Ramirez waited beside a rifle case. Her pulse quickened when she saw it. A Marine M40A5 sniper rifle, the weapon she'd once known more intimately than her own heartbeat. "Recon spotted the insurgent staging area," Richards said without preamble. "They're coordinating from a position in the hills. Our counter-battery radar indicates they're setting up mortars for another bombardment. If they hit us again before we can reinforce our defenses." He didn't need to finish. Sarah understood. The hospital was devastated, their defenses weakened, their personnel exhausted. Another coordinated assault would overwhelm them. "You want me to take the shot?" Sarah said quietly. "I'm asking if you can take the shot," Richards corrected. 400 meters, darkness, elevated target, no spotter, high-stress situation. The shooter we recovered this rifle from is dead. Our designated marksman is in surgery with a collapsed lung. You're the only qualified sniper on this entire base." He paused. "Can you do it?" Sarah stared at the rifle case, feeling 3 years of carefully constructed identity crumbling around her. She'd promised herself, never again. No more killing from distance, no more watching lives end through a scope, no more being the angel of death perched on rooftops and hillsides. "Captain Chen," Ramirez said softly, "those bastards are going to hit us again. And when they do, everyone in that hospital, the patients, Torres, Jackson, that little Afghan girl you've been taking care of, they're all going to die unless someone stops this." Sarah's eyes found the hospital behind them, the tattered canvas walls, the flickering emergency lights, the shadows of people moving inside. People she'd saved. People she'd promised to protect. "If I take this shot," she said slowly, "there's no going back. Everyone will know what I am, what I was." "Everyone already knows," Richards said. "The question is whether you're willing to accept it yourself." Sarah opened the rifle case with trembling fingers. The M40A5 lay nestled in foam padding, sleek and deadly, a precision instrument designed for a single purpose. She lifted it out, feeling the familiar weight settle into her hands like greeting an old friend she'd tried to forget. "I'll need a spotter," she said, her voice steady now, the decision made. "I'll do it," Ramirez volunteered immediately. "You're wounded, Sergeant." "I can still read wind and call adjustments, ma'am. And you're going to need someone watching your 6." 20 minutes later, Sarah was prone on the hospital's eastern observation post, the M40A5 resting on sandbags, her eye pressed to the scope. Ramirez lay beside her, wounded shoulder braced, scanning the hills through binoculars. "Target area is northeast, 430 meters," Ramirez murmured, falling into the ancient rhythm of spotter and shooter. "Elevation 12 degrees, wind left to right, estimate 8 to 10 knots." Sarah's breathing slowed automatically, her heart rate dropping as training and instinct took over. Through the scope, she could see the insurgent position, figures moving in the pre-dawn darkness, setting up equipment, coordinating. And there, partially concealed behind a generator housing, the commander directing operations with hand signals. "I have eyes on target," Sarah whispered. "Adult male, dark clothing directing fighters, partially concealed, limited exposure window." "Confirmed, that's your shot, ma'am. Wind steady at 9 knots. No mirage yet, temperatures still too low." Sarah's mind fell into the familiar meditation of the sniper. Distance, wind, elevation, humidity, temperature. 1,000 variables condensed into a single moment, a single decision, a single pull of the trigger. She'd done this 27 times before, each one burning into her memory like brands. But this would be different. This wasn't a distant figure on a battlefield. This was a conscious choice to pick up the rifle again, to embrace the identity she tried to bury, to accept that saving lives sometimes meant taking them. Through the scope, the insurgent commander shifted, exposing himself for a brief moment as he gestured to his fighters. Sarah's crosshairs settled on his center mass, her finger finding the trigger with familiar intimacy. Then she thought of Jimmy Martinez bleeding out in her arms, of the Marines she couldn't save, of the little Afghan girl sleeping in bed 12, of Private Jackson's terrified face during the assault, of Major Torres asking if she was okay, of all the lives that would end if she didn't take this shot. "Wind call?" she asked softly. "9 knots steady, hold 1 mil right." Sarah adjusted, her breathing entering that perfect rhythm. Inhale, exhale, natural respiratory pause. The world narrowed to the space between heartbeats, the microscopic movements of the crosshairs, the gentle pressure of her finger on the trigger. She saw her past in the scope's view, every shot she'd taken, every life she'd ended, every nightmare that followed. She saw her present too, the nurse who healed, who comforted, who chose life over death. And in that moment she understood they were the same person, not contradictory, not opposite, but two sides of a single identity. The warrior protected, the healer saved. Both were necessary, both were her. "Shooter ready," Sarah whispered. "Send it." The rifle kicked against her shoulder with familiar authority. Through the scope, she watched the round travel across 400 meters of darkness and strike true. The insurgent commander jerked backward, the 7.62 round punching through his chest. He crumpled, his fighters immediately scattering in confusion. "Hit confirmed," Ramirez called. "Target down, beautiful shot, ma'am." But Sarah was already working the bolt, chambering another round, acquiring the next target. A fighter trying to rally the others, directing them toward the mortar position. She led him slightly, compensating for his movement, and fired. He went down. Second target neutralized. The insurgent force was in chaos now, leaderless and panicked. Some tried to man the mortars anyway. Sarah's third shot destroyed the mortar's sight mechanism. Her fourth caught a fighter trying to shoulder fire an RPG at the base. Her fifth and sixth dispersed the remaining insurgents, sending them fleeing into the hills. 6 shots, 6 hits, the secondary assault broken before it could begin. Sarah lowered the rifle slowly, her hand steady despite the emotional earthquake inside her chest. She'd just killed 2 more men. No, she'd protected 32 lives. Both were true, both mattered. "Outstanding shooting," Ramirez said quietly. "Command will want you to train our scouts. That was textbook sniper work." Sarah didn't respond. She was staring at the rifle in her hands, at the instrument that had defined so much of her life, both before and now. She'd thought she could leave it behind, bury it with her old identity. But tonight had proven the truth. You couldn't bury part of yourself. You could only accept it, integrate it, learn to live with both the light and shadow inside your soul. Behind them, the base's quick reaction force mobilized to pursue the fleeing insurgents. The immediate threat was over. The hospital was safe. 32 lives protected by 6 precise shots from a woman who tried to stop being a killer and learned she could be both killer and healer simultaneously. "Ma'am," Ramirez said gently, "you okay?" Sarah thought about the question. Was she okay? She'd killed 11 men tonight, 9 in close combat, 2 from distance. She'd saved 32 lives. She'd confronted the identity she'd tried to escape and discovered it was inseparable from who she'd become. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I will be." She secured the rifle and stood, looking back at the hospital where Torres was still working, where Jackson was recovering, where the little Afghan girl slept peacefully, protected by violence she'd never know about. The sun was beginning to rise now, painting the Afghan sky in shades of pink and gold. A new day, a new understanding. Sarah Chen, Marine Scout sniper and trauma nurse, warrior and healer, both, always both. She picked up the rifle case and walked back toward the hospital, carrying both her identities with her, no longer trying to choose between them but learning, finally, to embrace them both. The wolf and the dove, coexisting in a single soul. And for the first time in 3 years, Sarah felt something close to peace with that truth. The sun rose over Forward Operating Base Sentinel like a benediction, washing away the darkness that had brought so much violence. Sarah sat on a concrete barrier outside the destroyed hospital, the M40A5 rifle still resting across her knees, her hands tracing its familiar contours with something between reverence and regret. 11 men dead by her hand in a single night, 32 lives saved by the same hands. The mathematics of morality didn't balance that easily. "Thought I'd find you here." Major Torres approached with 2 cups of coffee, both military grade and terrible. He handed her one and sat beside her, close enough to offer comfort but respecting her space. Command is calling it the hospital defense, already becoming legendary. The night nurse who turned out to be the base's most lethal operator. Sarah sipped the bitter coffee, saying nothing. "Colonel Richards wants to put you in for a Bronze Star," Torres continued. "Maybe higher. Says what you did last night goes beyond duty. Said you're a genuine hero." "Heroes don't enjoy killing," Sarah said quietly, her voice hoarse from smoke and shouting and emotion. Torres was quiet for a long moment. "Did you enjoy it?" Sarah closed her eyes, remembering each trigger pull, each life ending through her scope or over her sights. "No, every shot hurt. Every single one felt like losing a piece of myself." She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. "But I'd do it again. To protect them, to save lives, I'd do it all again." "Then you're exactly the kind of hero we need," Torres said simply. "The kind who understands the cost, who carries the weight, who doesn't take killing lightly but does it anyway when innocent lives depend on it." Before Sarah could respond, the sound of small footsteps made them both turn. The little Afghan girl from bed 12 stood in the hospital entrance, her bandages fresh and clean, her dark eyes curious. She'd witnessed the entire battle from the surgical suite, seen Sarah transformed from gentle nurse to deadly warrior. The child walked over slowly, hesitantly, then did something unexpected. She wrapped her small arms around Sarah's waist in a tight hug. Sarah's breath caught. She set down the rifle carefully and returned the embrace. This tiny life she'd protected through violence, this innocent soul who represented everything worth fighting for. The girl whispered something in Pashto that Sarah's limited knowledge couldn't quite translate, but the meaning was clear. "Thank you." When the child returned inside, Torres noticed tears streaming down Sarah's face. "You okay?" "I killed 11 people to protect her," Sarah whispered. "To protect all of them, and I'd do it again. What does that make me?" "Human," Torres said firmly. "Beautifully, terribly human. The capacity for violence in service of protection. That's not evil, Sarah. That's love expressed through the only language some threats understand." Staff Sergeant Ramirez appeared, his arm still in a sling but his expression determined. "Captain Chen, ma'am, the wounded are asking for you, including some of the insurgents we captured." He paused meaningfully. "They want the nurse who saved them even after, well, everything." Sarah stood slowly, her body aching from combat and exhaustion, her soul aching from choices that had no easy answers. She looked at the rifle one last time, then handed it to Ramirez. "Make sure this gets back to the armory." "You sure, ma'am? Command wants you leading sniper training, your skills." "My skills include saving lives, Sergeant. That's the training I choose to lead." Sarah's voice was steady now, resolute. "But if this base is threatened again, if innocent lives need protection." She met his eyes directly. Then I'll pick up the rifle again, because that's also who I am. Ramirez nodded with deep respect. Yes, ma'am, you're both, and we're damn lucky for it. Inside the hospital, Sarah returned to her patients. She checked vitals on recovering Marines, adjusted IVs for the Afghan civilians, and yes, she treated the captured insurgents with the same professional care as everyone else. One of them, the commander she'd shot from 400 meters, watched her work with confused hatred and grudging respect. Why? He asked in broken English as she changed his bandages. Why save enemy? Sarah thought carefully before answering. Because healing is what I choose. Because every life has value, even yours. Because if I become like the people who want to destroy innocence, then what am I protecting? The insurgent had no response to that, just watched her work with eyes that held something other than pure hatred for the first time. Private Jackson found her during her break, his young face still processing everything he'd witnessed. Captain, I've been thinking about what you said, about being afraid but doing it anyway, about being strong enough to do what's necessary. He hesitated. Will you teach me, not just to fight but to be like you, to know when to fight and when to heal? Sarah studied the young Marine, seeing herself years ago, idealistic, frightened, trying to figure out how to carry both strength and compassion in a world that demanded both. Jackson, I'll teach you what I've learned, but understand this path isn't easy. You'll carry every life you take. You'll question every choice. You'll wonder if you're a good person or a monster. And what's the answer? Jackson asked quietly. That you can be both, Sarah said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. You can be strong enough to protect and gentle enough to heal. You can be a warrior and a caregiver. The trick is knowing which one the moment requires and being brave enough to be both without apology. As the day progressed, Sarah fell back into the rhythm of nursing, medications, wound care, comfort, healing. But she moved differently now. No longer trying to hide her tactical awareness, no longer apologizing for her situational readiness, no longer pretending that part of her didn't exist. Colonel Richards visited that afternoon with official paperwork. The Bronze Star recommendation is going through, and I have a proposal for you. He handed her a folder. We're establishing a new program, combat medics with advanced tactical training, healers who can fight when necessary, fighters who understand the sanctity of life. I want you to lead it. Sarah opened the folder, scanning the program outline. Training combat medics in tactical operations while maintaining their medical focus. Teaching them to be protectors and healers simultaneously. Everything she'd been forced to learn in the crucible of a single night, now systematized and taught. This is asking me to be both, she said slowly. Officially, not hiding one or the other. This is asking you to be exactly who you are, Richards corrected, and to teach others that both identities can coexist, that strength and compassion aren't opposites, they're partners. Sarah thought of Jimmy Martinez, her fallen spotter who'd believed in her even when she doubted herself. She thought of the 11 men she'd killed last night and the 32 lives she'd saved. She thought of the little Afghan girl's hug and the insurgent commander's confused question about why she'd healed him. I'll do it, she said quietly, on one condition. Name it. The program's motto, first to heal, last to harm, always to protect. Because that's the order of priority. Healing comes first, always, but when harm is necessary to protect the innocent. She paused, accepting the truth fully for the first time. Then we do what must be done. Richard smiled. I'll have it written into the program charter. That evening, as her shift ended, Sarah returned to her quarters. She opened her footlocker, not to hide its contents anymore, but to integrate them. The ghillie suit, the range cards, the photo of Jimmy and her fallen brothers. She placed her nursing certifications beside them, her medical textbooks next to her sniper manuals. 2 identities, one person, both real, both necessary, both her. She pulled out a notebook and began writing. Not orders or medical notes, but a letter to her younger self, the woman who'd fled from violence into healing, thinking she had to choose between them. Dear Sarah, you're going to spend 3 years trying to bury who you were, thinking that healing and fighting are opposites. You're wrong. They're two sides of the same commitment to protect life at all costs. You'll kill again. It will hurt every time, but you'll also save lives that would otherwise be lost. You'll be both warrior and healer, and that's not a contradiction. It's completion. Jimmy would be proud of who you've become, all of you. The wolf and the dove can share the same soul. Love. You. Sarah folded the letter and placed it in the footlocker, then closed the lid gently, not locking it away, just integrating it. Through her window, she could see the hospital being repaired, canvas being replaced, equipment being restored. Private Jackson was helping with the work, moving carefully on his healing leg. The little Afghan girl played nearby, laughing, a sound that seemed impossible after so much violence, yet here it was. Life continuing, life protected, life worth every difficult choice. Major Torres appeared at her door. Dinner at the DFAC. Figured you could use some company, and maybe some terrible military food as a palate cleanser from terrible military coffee. Sarah smiled, genuinely smiled for the first time since the battle. Sounds perfect, actually. As they walked together through the base, she noticed something different. Marines nodded with respect that carried no fear, just acknowledgement. Medics greeted her with pride. Even Colonel Richards offered a subtle salute as they passed. They knew who she was now, all of who she was. And instead of the shame she'd expected, Sarah felt something else entirely, acceptance, not just from them but from herself. Captain Sarah Chen, USMC Scout Sniper and Trauma Nurse. 11 confirmed kills added to her record. 32 lives saved in a single night. Both truths existing simultaneously, neither canceling the other, both defining the woman she'd finally learned to be. The sun set over Fob Sentinel, painting the Afghan mountains in shades of amber and gold. Somewhere in those mountains, insurgents would regroup, would plan new attacks, would threaten new innocents. And when they did, Sarah would be ready, with medical supplies and weapons both, with compassion and lethality, with healing hands that could also hold a rifle steady at 400 meters. She'd stopped trying to choose between her identities. She'd learned, finally, to embrace them both. The wolf and the dove, dancing together in a single soul, each making the other stronger, each giving the other purpose. And in that integration, that acceptance of all she was and could be, Sarah Chen found something she'd been searching for since Jimmy died in her arms. Peace. Not the peace of never fighting again, but the peace of knowing when to fight, when to heal, and that both came from the same source: love for the innocent, commitment to protection, and the courage to be both fierce and gentle as circumstances demanded. As she entered the dining facility, Sarah looked back one last time at the hospital, her battlefield, her sanctuary, her proving ground. Tomorrow she'd begin training others in the art of being both. Tonight she'd simply be grateful for the privilege of serving, in all the complicated, contradictory, beautifully human ways that service required. The end.